Start.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Licott. Welcome back to another edition of VC TV. We've got a fun and exciting week here ahead for you, and we're kicking it off today with some great topics, and those are transportation, supply chain. We know that a lot has happened in these two industries, both as investors and entrepreneurs. From an entrepreneur perspective, more development and more building is happening at the supply chain level than ever before. For consumers, the supply chain of how we get products, how we buy products, how we consume products has drastically changed in the past 6 months and forever will going forward in the next 12 to 18 months. And we've brought on the best and the brightest from around the world to share with us their view of what's happening in that space, along with transportation. Transportation had a foundational move and change in our life, going back to the 2009, 2010, and the rise of the gig and sharing economy. And the ideas of ride sharing popped up. Now, fast forward 10 years later, we're talking about autonomous vehicles. We're talking about flying cars. Yes, they are coming. We have talked about them, and we're going to talk more about them today. We're talking about how transportation has shifted all throughout our lives, from last mile to the bigger mile, and how we will get around going forward, whether that be here on the ground, in the air, or as we've talked about on previous episodes, to the stars as well. And so with that, a big thank you and a shout out to your audience for joining us today. As we do here on every episode of VCTV, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to drop them in the chat, throw them on social media. Elena and myself will do our best to ask them in real time. If not, we're all available 24/7, 365 on social media, and would love to hear from you and continue the conversation. If you'd like to be on today's show or shows like this in the future to share your insights, either as an investor or as an entrepreneur, reach out. We'd love to hear from you and love to have you on the show as a speaker or as the opportunity to pitch us and our live investor audience as well. And a big shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for bringing and making VC TV possible to any screen on any device, wherever you may be in the world. And now let's go ahead and get started, introduce each and every one of our guests. Some you might recognize and some new faces as well. But before we get started, I want to welcome in one of my dear co-hosts, who I've had the pleasure of joining on each and every one of our shows to kick us off here in the past few weeks. Gary Fowler, welcome back, the man of AI. Little intro, little background for the few out there who may not know you.
Thanks, Kyle. It's good to see you again. Hope you had a great weekend.
Too.
Anyhow,
you as well.
Thank you. So I just want to say a few words. My name's Gary Fowler, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done 15 companies. My biggest exit, and Kyle's heard this a number of times, I was on the original management team of Click Software, sold last August for $1.35 billion. I also created Yva.ai. I'm the co-founder of that, one of the top 10 AI HR tech companies, and I love AI. So neural networks, variational autoencoders, you name it, I love it. I started my first company at 21, and I got addicted. So I look at how we can change the world, how we can make our lives a lot better, and how we can do it very, very, very quickly and get shit done. Thanks,
Absolutely. Kyle. And thank you, Gary. And for those who are not familiar with how much he loves AI, you're going to hear a lot about it today. Artificial intelligence, as Gary will emphasize, plays a very foundational role in how the new supply chain is moving forward and its digitization. Also around transportation, as we look towards autonomous, where that may or may not be going in the near future, artificial intelligence is playing a role in that. But before we get into that point, I want to welcome back Mark. Mark, welcome back to the show. A little intro, a little background on yourself.
Yeah, 15 years experience, Lebanese, was in the Marines for a while, built companies. I'm really an operator. Probably if you want to talk about claim to fame, I bought a company for $1 from E&Y and we sold it for over 200 million. And then I've done a bunch of those and invested and done a VC, private equity. On a personal level, I beat cancer 3 times, stage 4 once, had 11 surgeries, broke my back, got out of a wheelchair 2 years later and lost 240 pounds. So I'm very big on aligning everything from empathy to execution to capital, all of it to make it mesh properly.
Absolutely. And welcome back. And it's an honor every time we get to have a show with you and hear more of those stories and triumphs in your life. It's pretty incredible. And seeing that from both the entrepreneur and the investor side and how things have progressed for you, it's a good inspiration to those that are listening in our audience. And last but not least, Carl, welcome to the show for the first time. It's a pleasure to have you somewhere here in the Bay near me as well. My neighbor, welcome Carl to the show. Little intro, a little background on yourself.
Hi, Kyle. Nice to be here. Well, so I have about several decades of experience as a CFO for startups and turnarounds. And about 25 years ago, I started a company that arguably was doing equity crowdfunding before it was called such a thing. Last year, I wrote a book that flowed out of that experience, and it's called The Fair Share Model.
Right.
And it's about a performance-based capital structure for venture stage initial public offerings. I say it's reimagining capitalism at the DNA level because it deals with how to balance and align ownership interests between investors and employees when there's a public offering. And the former chairman of Silicon Valley Bank called it an important work.
Wow. Well, let's get the link to the audience. I'll get the link so everyone can check out the book. And I know Gary has a new article that we'll share as well. So anything mentioned today, I'll do my best to capture in the show notes following the show as well. But well, welcome everybody. This is exciting. We've got quite a diverse set of individuals here on the panel. So to our audience, again, as investors and entrepreneurs, pay attention, drop in your questions. We'd love to hear from you and prepare yourself for what we're about to dive into and getting everyone's perspective. And gentlemen, I want to start today's discussion. Again, we're talking about transportation and supply chains. And I really want to get to what's happening in the world around this. And let's start in separating these. Let's start with transportation. What have you seen, or what is your views on the current state of transportation and where things may be headed in the near future as so much has changed in our world? So Gary, let's start with you and we'll come around to everybody as well. So the current state of transportation as you see it.
Well, I mean, the situation, it depends. Are you talking about personal transportation or commercial, Kyle? What do you want to?
It's a great question. Let's actually go at both. So let's start with personal transportation.
Sure. The situation. So last year I had the honor of being asked by Magna, which is a contract manufacturing for BMW and Toyota. They're making a new Z4 and Supra in Graz, Austria. So they give me a peek into the future, what autonomous vehicles were going to look like. And it was absolutely incredible, because imagine having a minivan that actually configures itself based on need. So if one time it's going to be picking up groceries, it actually throw the seats back automatically, self-driving again, set up certain racks on the side, delivers the groceries, it's picking up people, it turns into a people mover next. Configurable automobiles, configurable vans. So in terms of autonomous, think about this. If the insurance companies could reduce the risk by having autonomous cars using LiDAR and other technologies, how much less would the insurance be? Because they don't have the human factor anymore. So when it starts, it's going to happen. You will be forced, because insurance is going to be so highly priced. And this is just not, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
It's not just going to happen in personal vehicles. This is happening commercial too. I saw at that same event, Boeing had a vehicle that was a quadricopter, one of those transports with 4 propellers, that's talking about moving personally for the future. So there's a tremendous opportunity. It's incredible. So I think where we are today, that we'll be forced to move into these autonomous vehicles. We'll be forced to do things differently. We'll be forced to have sustainability. Look at Tesla. I just saw something yesterday, Kyle, that said Tesla's worth more than most of the other car companies. Just Tesla. Now, they said Elon Musk couldn't do it. By the way, they also said he couldn't do space. They used to laugh at him, right? They laughed at him until yesterday, till they landed in the ocean and they recovered at less cost, right? It's amazing. So it's in front of us now. Transportation to the stars, transportation for personal vehicles, transportation for commercial. I mean, it's upon us. We're going to have to refine the way we do it. We're going to have to look at alternative fuels, as we talked about before, Kyle. Think about it. The population of the earth has quadrupled in the last 100 years. We cannot quadruple the population again and expect to be driving gas guzzling cars. It's just not going to happen. We won't be around. So we got to change things.
Well, and there's also an argument of change of new business models, new processes, as you said. Like, there's a lot that's going to happen. Mark, to you, same question around what are you seeing as kind of the current state of transportation, you know, at the personal level, and we'll migrate into the commercial side.
Yeah, I'll agree with Gary on that, and I'll even go a step further. I actually drove in a futuristic vehicle that flies above the ground and goes on water, and I predict within probably 10 years we will be going like above the highway, like not like 10,000 feet, but you know, we'll be up in the air driving vehicles short distance. From a business standpoint, I welcome it. I built a trucking company from like 2 trucks that were DOT under regulation to 64, and I mean, it saves manpower, it helps for gas, it helps get food and goods there. So there's a lot. There's also a company in Arizona that is really, really cool, and I think will give Tesla a run for its money. I'll have to think about the name, but it's coming out. They're having a beautiful truck in December. I'll think about it before this show's over.
Okay, and there is an argument that a lot is starting to heat up in that space as well when it comes to personal vehicles and the redefining of those vehicles. To Gary's point, I've seen a lot of modular-based companies over the past 5 to 10 years kind of come on scene, and now these things are starting to happen, right, as well. And I'll pause there and make sure Carl gets a chance. Carl, to you as well, same, what are you seeing as kind of the current state of, you know, personalized transportation as we know it today? And you're on mute, just to let you know, Carl. Yep.
There we go. You know, I think one of the big trends is going to be the increase in electronics. We've seen that trend taking place for a couple of decades. Linking electronics in vehicles to the web, tracking, for tracking maintenance, for other types of things that might need to happen to vehicles or goods while in transit, or people, I think will be something that develops over the next decade or so. Gary made the point about Tesla's market value. To me, that's more of a mark of the measure of the lack of valuation consciousness in the public market than a measure of true worth for Tesla. But I do think another thing that would be interesting to watch will be as China and India continue to build up their capacity to manufacture parts and vehicles, they may become more and more of a exporter of those products. And because transportation is viewed as sort of a national resource for so many economies, it may be kind of interesting to see what that stress will be like between protectionism and a desire for low cost.
And that brings up an interesting intersection into supply chains, right? I mean, transportation does play such a foundational role in the world of supply chain and logistics, right? How do we get goods and services or goods and products from point A to point B? And so, same question all around is, what are you guys seeing as kind of the overall state of supply chain, and what's changed, what's happened as things have really digitized more rapidly, I think, than anyone ever expected, and potentially ever before in the last 6 months. And Carl, would love to start with you on this. What are you seeing again on the advancements of supply chains in terms of what's happening in the world and where we go today?
Well, when I think about the two topics related, it seems like transportation has been getting faster and supply chains have been getting tighter. With the post-pandemic anticipating, what dynamics might be there, you wonder, are we going to return back to that trend, mega trend, or is there going to be some loosening? I think, supply chain, wow, it's so critical for manufacturing, but I think just in time is going to continue to be an important thing. Sharing, reusability, in part because of the cost, because of environmental concerns. Safety will always be an issue. The ability of manufacturers to spur demand, desire, I think can't be overlooked, because it allows consumers to basically redefine what's important to them. Mm-hmm. So as some new capabilities come into play in the technology stream, either in transportation or supply chains, rely on those who will be benefiting to be promoting the benefits of it, and they're going to create markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, from what we've seen in transportation, and you brought up China and India, for instance, so much has happened, and it's been focused on the commercial side, more aligned around supply chains, right? Getting products from point A to point B very autonomously. Here in the Bay Area, I was walking, out on a daily walk, and saw a small little robot delivering my food, or someone else's food, I should say, and which plays a role in the transportation, right? It goes into that idea of last mile delivery, or what we think of as the last mile as consumers. And this is all playing a very shifting role into how we are going to get our goods and services. But also, Mark, what else are you seeing in terms of how things have changed in supply chain and where things are currently? Because the digitization, is insane. As we've talked about on previous shows, how fast this has changed as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'll give you a non-sexy and a sexy example. A non-sexy example from a granular perspective, I was in an Amazon plant where they have a certain amount of minutes, 12, to load on products on a rack, to where a truck's going to come in and has to deliver it on time to different areas in a particular area. And everything has to be placed at a certain way, a certain speed, and right away the truck has to leave. The truck broke down. That's where, if it was autonomous and so forth, those issues wouldn't have happened. So that delays all those products, all of delivery, and it was a mishmash across so much, something so simple. So that's on a small micro level. On a macro level, something that no one has been talking about, and I see so much innovation, is ferries and boats. People forget how much gets transported on that. And at one time, I was part of an investment group that invested in those to transport oil. Because look, when gas is high, nobody wants to pay transportation fees. That becomes a problem. But when gas is low, transportation fees doesn't matter anymore. So then you can rush them back and forth, right? But those things cost a couple of $100 million. So I was part of a group that invested in used ones. Another group, which is probably one of the two biggest in the world, invested in new ones. They ended up losing over $10 billion. Why? Because by the time they got the new ones, it was too late and prices went up. So there's a lot of, so those things break down a lot. So there's a lot of autonomy coming on with that. And that's something you don't really hear. You hear about cars, you hear about planes, but there's a lot of goods. If you're talking about China to here and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I know a young lady who bought a beautiful pair of heels for $700. She got them from China for $44. That might not be like, big to somebody, but if you're into shoes, that's big. And then you supply them at your store.
It's a lot of extra shoes you can make up on that difference. But it's funny enough you mentioned that, because in my show notes I actually had boats as something to talk about on autonomous. So you've already covered it. So perfect. We'll check that one off. But you're right on supply chain right there. The water, the seas do play such a big foundational role. But Gary, I want to come to you. I mean, we've talked supply chains to death over the past 2 weeks, and also I'll say in a very positive way as well, because there is a supply chain to everything we do. But most times when we talk about supply chain and logistics, it mostly comes around manufacturing. However, supply chains play a very big role in everything we do, as I just said. And so to you, what are you seeing as this continually evolving state of where supply chains are today?
Yeah, I mean, there's what we forget about, Kyle. I mean, think about this. A couple of months ago in a meat packing plant, I think it was Smith in Kansas, they had a problem because of COVID in the plant. So they could not cut the meat because they had an outbreak of COVID. We've got to stop these challenges before they get started. We've got to do the thermal detection. We've got to do the testing. We've got to start right at the heart of it, because as Mark alluded to, the supply chain breaks down with one thing, one truck, one person sick, it breaks down. So we've got to prevent before. So across the entire supply chain. The other thing is we've got to move away from paper. And as we know now with the digital transformation, we've got to be able to embrace the digital transformation. And as I've said many, many times, the companies that do that will win. The companies that don't won't.
And that's the name of the game, right? You either innovate or you die, and very simply and very bluntly put. And digitization in the last 6 months, as we continue to have as a theme on our shows here at VCTV, has put industries and businesses in a new paradigm. You either go or you don't. And if you don't, we'll see what happens. If you go, there's so much opportunity ahead. And from an investor standpoint, that's a very opportunistic time as well. And what makes this so exciting, and what I want to switch to next, is now the technologies. So we've talked a little bit about where transportation is and supply chain, but what's powering these two and what's changing them for the future are technologies that underlie. And so Gary, I want to start with you, and then I'm going to come around to Mark and Carl. And Carl, I also want to get into your book in a bit, so hold there. And Mark, we're talking about empathy in a minute too. So Gary, I want to start with the technologies. We love AI. We know it's the new electricity, and I want you to talk about that. But I'm going to get into blockchain, and we've got a few others. For you, how do you see technology, whether it be artificial intelligence?
I love it. You take the words right out of my mouth. The new electricity. I mean, I don't have to say anything anymore. But I mean, you think about it. What we have is, again, in the supply chain, we're inundated with information. So getting the right truck, the right plane at the right place at the right time, and more importantly, how do we make sure we have all the right truck that has the right capacity, that's got the right driver, that's close to the right airport, that gets on the right plane? There's a lot of logistics through the supply chain. And that's where artificial intelligence, in fact, as I said before, I was on the original management team of Click Software out of Israel. And that's exactly what Click was sold to Salesforce in August. But that's exactly, those are exactly the kind of technologies. If you want to have a system, we got to get, a lot of times, I'm sure Mark's seen this a lot of this stuff's on paper. It's not digitized. And so you can't go from a ferry to being in New York City in some store without going through, without digitizing that process. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've got to ensure data privacy. As we're going down through this whole environment, we've got to ensure data privacy from the suppliers. And
absolutely.
And then giving the suppliers an incentive to share among themselves, right? To be able to share. So it's tokens, whatever we do, we've got to incentivize the system. And it's before, Kyle, 6 months ago, it was something we should do. And now it's something we have to do.
I love it. And the one thing you actually brought up we have not talked about is that incentive model. So we're going to come back to that, because the thing that you're spot on, right, is that, and we've painted this picture before, right? The idea that you wake up in the morning, and this is out of my TED talk, but no self-promotion here, just as a theory, as a painting of a picture. Is you wake up in the morning, your vehicle knows that the right optimal time to pick you up, picks you up, takes you to the office. While you're at the office, it's driving around, making you money, taking care of these things, maybe handling some of that transportation of goods. It's this whole connected, always moving type economy that we're moving into. But the paper and pencil part, many don't realize, is actually something that happens in so many industries. And whether that's artificial intelligence that's helping to power when data is put into place, or it's actually getting blockchain into the picture and having a transparent record of trust to bring some of these companies, some of these industries from paper and pencil into the digital age. There's so much happening. And the idea is a little bit of my background, Internet of Things. Let's just talk real quick. And Mark and Carl, I'm coming to you next. I'm just chiming in for a second. The Internet of Things has talked about digitizing supply chains for 10 years. And we've done it in small little bits and pieces, but just now we're getting to that point where we can start installing sensors, where we can start digitizing that process, either in whole or in pieces, keeping things on premise, a little bit more private, as opposed to just being in the cloud. And now companies can go from seeing nothing to seeing something. So they can get insurance that the good that's coming from point A to point B got there, and it got there safely, and it got there in the right temperature. It got there with no additional hands. It got there with so much more insight. And then leveraging AI and other machine learning, as we've talked about, leveraging that data to then optimize things, right? It was UPS that optimized their transportation route for fuel efficiency years ago, right? Only making right turns. That was basics. We're about ready to quadruple that in ways we've never even imagined, of leveraging sensors, leveraging this new connected world that we're heading into for supply chain, so that those shoes that Mark's friend ordered don't have to come from overseas. They can actually come from somewhere very hyper local in terms of the future of logistics we've talked about, and be delivered faster. And that original supplier can still get payment, right? And then there's the incentivizing. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment. But Carl, I want to come to you on this. I mean, technology plays a big role here. We just talked about AI and blockchain and data. How are you seeing technology play a role in all of this around supply chains?
I think it adds some keys for manufacturers to start to play with consumer desire, because the more things you can do, the more things you can offer. And we've got these warring things that drive demand for different products. It could be cost, could be safety, could be convenience, but then there's also that individual choice. What do people want? And sometimes they seem like they're at war with one another, or they settle in a particular quadrant, but people change, they just want to have something new. So maybe flexibility, the ability to figure out how to give your ultimate consumer or your customer what it is they want. I think that that's the key thing. So if they're worried about safety, if they're worried about delivery, tracking is really important. If they're worried about environmental types issues, packaging is going to be a concern. One of the things we didn't mention, I don't think, in these products that is a big part of the economy is food. And you can see that in recent years, we've been having growing of food in urban centers, abandoned areas, because the manufacturing wasn't there. But it shortened the supply chain. It allowed more safety than maybe growing in a field with the, not only the chemicals and whatnot, where hydroponic type of growth. So, it's really hard to figure out what the dominant trend is when it's like a piece of puzzle, the little Rubik's Cube type of thing. But we know at the end of the day, it's got to be meeting the desires of the ultimate consumer. And
you're
those
right.
can be influenced.
Right. They can be influenced and they do change. And to your comments around vertical farming, I mean, the amount of money that's wasted or lost on food every year from transportation is way bigger than I'm willing to quote on the show right now. And that plays a very big role. And, consumer behaviors do change and some things do stay the same, right? Going back to transportation, the idea of infotainment is going to play a very large role in the future of our vehicles and the future of how we do travel, right? Being able to handle payment, handle entertainment, handle all of these things within a vehicle. Those technologies are going to play a role as well, but we do change, right? Consumer behaviors do change. And I think to Gary and Mark's comments as well, the idea of what's happening now, this rapid digitization, either jump in or don't, is proving to that, right? Now as consumers, we want things more localized. We want them faster. We need them faster. And that's bringing up this market of hyper localization, right? Whether that be around logistics or just supply chains in general, finding things more locally to get them to us faster. Not talking about manufacturing. It's a different conversation for another day later this week. But nonetheless, when it comes to getting what we want when we want, that has not changed. Mark, to you, what technologies are you seeing playing a real big role in the future of supply chains as things are moving right now?
Well, look, to really appreciate it and to really understand it, let me walk the listeners and you through a real life example. So when you look at transportation, the first thing that happens is you have a broker. And a lot of that is pen and paper where that needs to be digitized because it's a lot of money. And that's a lot of money, not necessarily because it's a valuable load, maybe the project's doing well, so forth. So we'll say it's a sequence. So there in a building, there's a sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You build it through sequences. So all of a sudden, sequence 1 has been built. Now you need sequence 2. This is going to go from Kansas to downtown Chicago. So the gentleman who's driving this truck is a PhD. He ends up going, has plenty of time, stops at a casino to sleep there. Not a big deal. The truck doesn't start. Now there's a mishmash of where he is, where it stopped, etc. How to fix it. Already thousands of dollars are lost. Okay, it's fixed, so forth. Now all of a sudden, good luck getting into downtown Chicago onto a building that Obama's going to be there to welcome the load, and it has to be in gloves because it's a medical supply building. And what people don't appreciate and understand, some steel has to be loaded in a specific way, and you have to have a very high intellect and math, and the chains have to be put in a certain way. A lot of blue collar jobs are really very scientific. And even though people say, oh, it's blue collar, they're very difficult. They're much more difficult than tech and some of the thing. So to really understand it. So all of AI, to Gary's point, can be put into this. And if you explain that to a client, they're on it in a second because they understand every step. And even a customer. And remember, a customer doesn't care if no one cared that the iPhone is coming from China or being built by China till they couldn't get it on time, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so until you feel the pain, it doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And until banks were like the mafia, no one cared about blockchain or Bitcoin. All of a sudden, now boom. So you have to let the customer, consumer, whoever feel the pain. If they don't feel the pain, they're not going to buy into it. Electric cars came, people say because, oh, they want the planet better. Not true. It happened when gas prices went through the roof. Now, there are a bunch of people that care about the environment and so forth. Don't get me wrong. But as far as it really, truly being embraced.
Absolutely. And I think you're bringing up some really good points. And I actually want to take this to one additional level, and that's around smarter cities. Again, back to the point of IoT. I tease, but it's there on paper and on the web. The idea of smart cities has been around for, again, a decade and growing. And our cities have become more intelligent. But when we take it down to the level of transportation and supply chains, our cities have gotten more intelligent, and data is playing a huge role into that. And as Gary knows, and I'll let him start this off. And what do we see as autonomous and as data really start entering? Do we see these smarter cities, right? Are we going to see more data being shared? Goes into the incentivizing point for you there, Gary. Do we see cities being more open to sharing data, to being more connected, to really helping to optimize these things and become true smart cities?
Well, I mean, this is beyond politics, right? So it's going to have to happen. In fact, Kyle, in a couple of weeks, the head of the global manager for smart cities from Intel is going to be on my show, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. So, I mean, you just think about it though. The reason that transportation in Los Angeles, that they took down the part of the transportation system in the early 1900s, was because there was a consortium with General Motors that told them not to do it because they wanted them to burn fuel and drive cars, right? So you got to if the political will is there, and you're right about it with the situation with gas prices through the roof. So I think we're being forced to be able to be more efficient. And again, when I talk about the booming population of the world, 4 times, 7.8 billion people, grown 4x in the last 100 years. How in the world can we not do that? We have to be more efficient to be able to make this planet a livable place. So we've got to learn how to deal with dense populations. Now, I mean, think about another 50 years, we probably won't have cars. It's going to be required that you go on some other type of public transport. It's going to be required. How could you not do it? Population doubles again. It's crazy.
And the definition of public transportation is going to change, right? We've been talking about transportation. If we're no longer owning vehicles, right? We've already made that big step of going into shared, and Lyft actually just made a very big move as well, and partnered with Sixt, SIXT out of Germany to do shared vehicles. So for those that don't know, in Germany, many that don't own a vehicle actually use Sixt to rent a vehicle for a day, and also, or get a car from point A to point B, a rideshare. Now Lyft is starting that here in the States. So rideshare, last mile being scooters and bikes, to then vehicle share. So we're moving towards that. And now what you may see here in the coming years is this autonomous vehicle movement really taking off, where that is the new public transportation. You may not own that vehicle, but you just get in because there's a fleet of vehicles that are roaming around at any time. But with that being said, I want to switch gears here. We talked a lot about technology. We talked a lot about the industries. Let's talk money. I wish there was a money emoji that I could hit versus a smiley and a thumbs up. That'd be fun. But let's talk cash. So let's talk about investing in these spaces. These are full of opportunity. With opportunity comes focus, or else you're going to get lost and confused and very quickly make a lot of bad bets. So for each of you as investors, how do you see, or where do you see the areas of opportunity really to start investing in transportation and supply chains? I know those are two big questions, so you each got a few extra minutes to kind of share. Mark, let's start with you. As an investor, where are you seeing opportunity to start investing in both transportation and supply chains?
Well, I look at both. They're both very affluent and great, but Gary that understands the industry and comes from a different background and brings like a pain to that industry, then I'm in. And is it, I've looked at one that presented that they're going to make money within a year or two. I passed on it. I pass on bullshit and things that I think are just, I'm not a gambler. I do not gamble. You say, well, you got in Bitcoin. Yes, but I kept it. So I went through the rises and downs and back to up. So I really stick again to people and their expertise and the pain. Are you solving a pain? It's like my cancer, right? When I was throwing up blood, are you going to be able to have me stop that? If yes, how long, and so forth. The money will always come. There is not one industry that you can point to that does not make money. The question is it going to be you? Vitamin water, for God's sake, when we got in, that sold for 4.7 billion. Now you say, well, after that it didn't go through. Well, I get it, but I'm saying it can. So I always look into the people and the pain, and then the expertise, and I look into empathy. If there's arrogance and narcissism, I'm out, because then they're really thinking about their Lamborghini and all of that stuff. And you can have those, but later concentrate on just getting it done, on grinding. You know, I look at it like building a company is like losing weight. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And if you do it that way, you win. And
that's true. And for investors, that's something to be mindful of, because these two industries, specifically transportation, is a long game. It is not short. If you haven't invested in it, get ready for a long. On supply chain, that's a different story. And I think Gary will give us a little insight on that as well. So Gary, areas of opportunity you're seeing in these industries for investors that are looking at it.
Well, I mean, the situation, Kyle, you know, I love artificial intelligence. So anything that's out there that can help us make our decisions better, assistance that can help us guide us through whatever processes. I think in terms of alternate fuel, of course, electric cars. I mean, we're just talking about, Mark, I believe, was talking about the Nikola Badger, right? So there are other companies that come out. This is just the beginning. I mean, just a small thing. 5 years ago, when I got one of the first electric bikes, people laughed. They thought it was funny. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget. I said, "Why would you buy an electric bike?" I said, "Well, because my knee hurts a little bit and I want to ride it, and it's great transportation." Now it's a boom. It's crazy, right? And so you can't, in fact, all bikes, because of the pandemic, it's hard to get anything. So we've got to look at things differently. So in terms of investment, I would look at things, as Mark said, where there are pain points, but you got to look at and do some customer development. You know, if you're dealing on a B2C side, are they willing to grab it out of your hands? Then the situation, we know that systems need to be digitally transformed. And so if we're doing paper on the front end of this, companies that can, you know, read that to do OCR and integrate it into the system all through the supply chain are going to win. Optimization algorithms, so you get the right truck or the right plane at the right place at the right time. Those technologies need to be more widely implemented. So as we said, from the ferry, I didn't know the ferry side, but it makes a whole lot of sense. From the ferry all to the consumer. Now, let's look at the entire supply chain. Let's optimize it. Let's understand it. It's not like before, as we've said many times, it's not an option anymore. You either use the technology during this pandemic or you don't. Let's check the people that are in the, butchers. Let's talk to the slaughterhouses and make sure that they're implementing, thermal detection and all kinds. So people prevent, like the pandemic, prevent it before it becomes before it affects the supply chain. So optimizing everything. We got a lot of data out there, and it needs to be collected in an entirely different way.
Absolutely. And Carl, to you, where are you seeing areas of opportunity? And I have a quick follow-up for you as well.
Well, it really seems to almost depend on where you are. We've talked a lot about technology, but there are some other prisms to consider. There's the economic conditions, which have been changing, and there's competitive conditions, which are sure to change as companies modify what they're offering are. And then societal ones. What do people want? How are they using these different services? So, it's sort of shifting ground all the time. And you have, Mark Andreessen, I think, once said, there's no bad ideas, there's just early ones.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So it's hard. I think it's unwise to think of these in a single filter, if you will. You got that whole backfield going on, and I guess the success in money, in making money in the markets, isn't so much trying to figure out what's going on with the fundamentals as much as what do you think the next guy is going to do next, and anticipating that. If they're going to act irrationally, you might be tempted to bid up Tesla, for example, because you think somebody's going to pay even more for it down the road. Human behavior and anticipating it plays such a major role in economics that it's just interesting to consider.
Absolutely. Well, to Mark and Gary's points as well, I think that, they're both pulling that out from the empathy and the data side to optimization in general, right? These are key areas that as investors you should be looking at when considering any companies in both transportation or supply chain, right? The supply chain is very vast. Very vast. There's plenty of opportunity throughout. It's just, where are you able to focus? And then again, do these play into what we've talked about? Autonomous, does it play into efficiency and optimization? And is there data that's collected that can be used to better improve and also to, if anything, create new opportunities or new products for those that are consuming? Carl, as we come to this lightning round, as we're coming to the top of the hour, quick question for you. You, as Gary is the AI master, you are the venture master. You've written this book on venture capital and some of the models that you've seen. What advice do you have for inspiring venture capitalists out there that are looking to begin making investments or raising their first funds from your knowledge of having put this book together?
People aspire to be venture capitalists a lot earlier in their careers than they used to be. It used to be you had to be accomplished in the operating area before you went into the venture area. I would say there are two fundamental risks that venture investors or investors in venture stage companies take on. One is failure risk. The other is valuation risk. Fraud is just a mixture of false or misleading disclosure added with valuation risk and failure risk. So failure risk requires some expertise in a domain. Failure risk is the potential that the enterprise isn't going to meet its operational goals. I say I'm going to jump this high, but my failure risk is that I'm going to actually be somewhere between here and the floor. Okay, you can't do much about failure risk other than use due diligence, or if you're in a position through corporate governance to affect the company's behavior. If it's a private company, you're kind of strapped in, like a toboggan ride. If you're investing in a venture stage public company, you can always sell your shares. So that's the failure risk. The valuation risk is overpaying for a position. And you can overpay for a company that hits all of its marks. So I think systematically, the venture industry, the private equity industry has found a way to succeed in a sector that has a lot of failure risk. And that's using deal terms. It's not, the fundamental thing that comes out of my book is the idea that nobody knows how to reliably value an early stage company. I make the analogy of this like being put in front of a classroom of elementary school kids and being tasked with figuring out who's going to be a success in life. And you can define success however you want. You're going to be wrong on both directions. And that's just the nature of life. It takes time for these things to play out. And it's not just a time progression. You've got these other impacts that are taking place. So how do you succeed in valuing a transaction? That's the big thing. The secret sauce turns out to be deal terms. Deal terms provide cushion from getting the number wrong. Deal terms can retroactively, that's why you see in a cap table for private companies, there can be compression if the company's success isn't as anticipated. If it meets some crunch time, you got different classes of stock that are going to be feeling some pain, including the employee. So my suggestion would be, think about if you can boil down the risk of venture investing to elemental factors. Those two was my take, and what I'm trying to do with the Fisher model is take the venture capital model with deal terms and adapt it to the public market.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen who are tuning in. If you're an inspiring investor, you're looking to start making investments not only in these areas but many others, definitely check out Carl's book. Mark and Gary, I want to come to each of you next. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs that are building in these spaces of transportation and or supply chain as we come to wrap here the show? Mark, let's start with you. What advice do you have for those founders that are out there building in these spaces?
Well, I mean, they need to find a market that there's a pain. They need to have a co-founder who's an operator, who understands execution, responsibility, accountability. And you can use AI, with COVID now, it's about everything that goes wrong boils down to carelessness and lack of leadership. You find me one company where it's the product that didn't perform, you won't. You will always find careless leadership in every single one. So if you can really take care of that, I always say without people problems, you have no problems. So you find those leaders, you find those guys that are going to be operating, and you use AI to predict that carelessness and the responsibility, accountability, and execution.
Absolutely, Gary.
Get there.
Sure.
Sorry, Mark.
If you're investing in poop, you'll make money in it if you have that.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, we had a lag there. So Gary, apologies. Now, I think Mark's caught back up. Okay, so now it's you. Technology, ladies and gentlemen. Gary, to you, same question.
Yes. So, from my standpoint, it's again, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So in the KISS principle, one is you want to get the revenue as soon as you can. You want to make sure you do your customer development. So you're validating your product to make sure you're not building something that nobody wants. You got to make sure, as Bob Dorff and Steve Blank say that people want to grab it out of your hands. It's absolutely important. And the founders need to do the customer development. I agree with Mark. I mean, on all my companies, my background, sales, marketing, operations, I always find a technology co-founder and or operations to be able to help out, to be able to, balance the team. And I want somebody that has a different opinion that's not always going to say, oh, you're right 100%. This is right. I want somebody that has another opinion, because if you don't, I had a startup one time where I did it as my own founder, right, myself, and I made a big mistake because I believed my own bullshit, and it didn't work. I thought I was smarter than the customers. I was wrong.
It's hard to look in the mirror and tell yourself you're wrong. All right, it's easy to tell yourself you're right.
Yeah.
That's
So I mean, we have so many opportunities. Look at the challenges that we're going to have. Look at the environments. We're nowhere, as we've talked about many times, inundated with information. You know, the data that's coming at us is incredible. How to be able to manage that data so that we can understand it and help us, as Mark said, make predictions for the future, be able to help us understand what we need to do. And, you know, with the unsupervised AI, start to make decisions for us, better decisions. So there's incredible opportunities out there today. Use the technology like Zoom, all the digital transformation is upon us. Use it to be able to help make your company grow. It didn't stop. And I also did a TED Talk. Passion, optimism, and visualization. Visualize where you want to go. Be passionate about it and be optimistic. The glass is half full. People don't want to hang around with you. They're not attracted to you if you don't believe that you're going to be able to do it. Go
Absolutely.
do it.
Get shit done, ladies and gentlemen. All right, closing thoughts, guys, as we hit the top of the hour here on Partner Monday. Want to make sure everyone can get to their meeting. So Carl, let's start with you. Quick closing thoughts, anything else to add? And then as we do here on every show, we like to give everyone the chance to give a shout out as to where they can find you online. So quick closing thoughts, and where can everyone find you online?
You know, I think the mega trend for this century is going to be, can the benefits of capitalism be more broadly realized? And so we're going to see innovation in capital markets. We're going to see, we continue to see interest in entrepreneurism around the world. Young companies are the engine of growth and job creation. These are things that are dominating popular discussion nowadays, and just keep your ear to the ground as to what's going on, and you'll make better informed decisions. My website is fairsharemodel.com. My book is on Amazon, ebook and print. It's 400 pages. Just because capital formation is such an interesting thing, it gets into all sorts of facets. I think Mark had mentioned failure. I've got a nice chapter on that. And the reason everybody's here watching is that everything is linked to one another. And once you start going down this path of thinking about these links, new things open up. So that's the opportunities that we're all interested in pursuing, both financially and intellectually.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carl. And to our audience, again, I'll add the link to Carl and to his book and the show notes as well. Mark, quick closing thoughts, and where can we find you?
Look, if you follow kind of what I mentioned and what Gary absolutely makes, and I 100% agree with what Carl said on the term sheet. And I think there's a lot of people that hate VCs because they do structure it that way and the company doesn't get success. But if you follow what we three have mentioned, the company then will succeed. And the greatest pleasure is when you are paying 10,000 employees or 5,000 because that money goes to them and feeds their families and gets them to school. That's the most satisfying part of it. And that's what I love about growing companies, because you're feeding families, you're prospering people that never had that opportunity and love it. And that's where the culture is important. Just Google Mark Hamadi, and if you really want to talk to me, really want to get a hold of me, I don't want to share where I'm at. You find me.
You're going on a mystery hunt, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Gary, last but not least, close us out here.
Yeah,
Closing
sure.
thoughts,
So, you know, I believe with the pandemic, this has offered tremendous opportunities for digital transformation. And companies have focused that to optimize, as we said, to be able to streamline processes are really there. There's credible amount of data around us. Focus on how you can make sense of that data. Look at where we are right now in this call. Mark's in Turkey, Carl's in California. I'm down in Palm Beach in Florida. You're in San Francisco, Kyle. I've been on the call. I have a call next with Russia and Belarus. I mean, we're all over the planet. Look, this is a global opportunity now. Have decentralized teams. Use where the best. If you can get development done in another place, that's better. Get it done. Use those scale. It is upon us. And what you need to do is think differently. So you can reach me, Gary Fowler, LinkedIn. You can, Gary at gsdvs.com. Get You Done Venture Studios, GSD is my company. Reach out to me. I'm happy to respond.
Awesome. Where can everyone find the show? YouTube?
So YouTube, yep. And
Wonderful.
we'll be broadcasting tomorrow. I have Peter Lukianoff, one of the top VCs from the Valley, is going to be on my show. And I just found out Guy Kawasaki is going to be joining my show September 22nd. We're going to be talking about positivity in the pandemic.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you so much, guys, for joining today. Thank you to our audience as well for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, give us a thumbs up, click subscribe. We'd love to hear from you as well. If we could approve, thank you, Gary. If there's anything else you'd like to hear, please do reach out, and we'd love to either have you on the show or bring some great new topics to VCTV. And also a big thank you to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for making VCTV possible. I'm Kyle Lacotte, your host. We'll be back here tomorrow for another edition of VCTV as we continue this week's build up to Friday, where we talk all about different industries and technologies leading up to what's all happening in venture capital and investments around the world. Carl, Mark, Gary, thank you. Elena,
Thank you,
and to the
Kyle.
entire LA Token team,
Thank
to our
you.
audience.